Hello, everybody. Welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, November 14th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We got to start talking about that big game going on in Athens, Georgia this upcoming weekend. Tennessee has a chance to knock Georgia out of the CFP race. Georgia just trying to stay alive and see if they can get one of those at-large bids. Then we'll get to the big noon controversy. A lot of Big Ten fans, specifically Penn State and Ohio State fans, that are none too happy with Fox and their current media deal, and I'll get into that and why some of their anger might be a little bit misguided. Then we'll get into some of the picks and previews. I want to get into Oregon, Wisconsin, as well as South Carolina, Missouri, two huge games that could be a little bit sketchy, especially for Oregon and Missouri, two teams that very much want to be in that CFP race. Then we'll get to the Big 12. I want to get to Utah at Colorado, going to be a really interesting game over there in Boulder. And then we'll get to Arizona State, Kansas State, a winner leaves town type of game. Whoever loses it is fully out of the race for the Big 12. Whoever wins it is still very much in the race, especially if Colorado were to lose to Utah. And then we'll finish it off. We'll do a little bit of a whip around. We'll get to all the top 25 games, or at least a vast majority of them, and definitely one of them that's really, really huge in the Group of 5 race for the CFP. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat, you'll see a little $sign. Add any question, comment you'd like there. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible. Really, really fun time of the year, so any questions you have, definitely use that super chat, and we can definitely have a little bit of a conversation here. Also, GSMCpodcast.net, still up and running, does the exact same thing. So either one of those, please utilize that, and we can have a fun back and forth. But let's get into this huge game that's going on in Athens, Georgia this upcoming weekend. It is Tennessee, it is Georgia, and it is a game that is as big as really anyone in that rivalry. Even when you go back to 2022, it was a huge game, no doubt about it, but there were still some hurdles for those teams to get over after that game. So definitely one of those that has the feeling of kind of a playoff game. This is something that we've gotten over the last little bit where it is outright an elimination game for Georgia. If they lose, I think it's nearly impossible for them to get into the CFP. There's been some kicking around of the idea of a 3-loss SEC team getting in. The only way that happens to me is if it's Bama and it's in the SEC title game. That would be the only way that I could see a 3-loss team, and that would be a 10-3 team, not a 9-3 team. So I think too much stuff would have to happen for Georgia to get in. Understand it's a really hard schedule, but at the end of the day, I think 3 losses would likely do them in. But they are favored in this game by 10.5 points, over-under set at 48.5. And for Tennessee, this is really about changing your program. As crazy as that sounds, it's kind of the Penn State situation in a lot of different ways, where they've been able to beat a lot of the teams below them in the last couple of years. They've been able to even get over Bama 2 out of the last 3 years, which has been huge for that program moving forward. They just haven't quite gotten UGA. They just haven't quite gotten that team in red and black, and it's going to be really interesting to see, can they get this win, and then what happens after that? It could be kind of a changing of the guard of sorts in the SEC, where you have a Tennessee team that has been rising over the last couple of years, and now they're just waiting for that one big spark plug, that one thing to say, we are on the same level, we might be better than some of the other teams at the top of the SEC, and Saturday would be the time to do it. But for the CFP, it's really straightforward. If Tennessee was able to win this one, it'd be really straightforward pretty much the rest of the way. Barring some crazy upset or anything like that, it would be the winner of Texas A&M facing off against Tennessee in Atlanta. Bar none, that would be the way it was, unless Tennessee were to lose to Vanderbilt or Texas were to lose to Arkansas or Kentucky or something crazy were to happen. That would be the matchup that you would get. So that would make things a little bit easier, at least on the noggin, to make sure that we know what's going to happen in the SEC the rest of the way. But at the end of the day, Georgia has plenty to play for here. Obviously a game that could knock them out of the entire race. Obviously a game that they kind of have their backs up against the wall, and it's one of those places that you feel like Georgia might be a really live dog. It was kind of that same feeling you got going into that Texas game, kind of getting it here, but we'll get into that here in a second. But getting into the game, I think it's a really interesting matchup. You got Carson Beck on one side, has been really struggling lately, and is not really showing signs of turning a corner. If he's going to turn one, it's going to have to be on Saturday, and if it's not, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. And frankly, it's going to be pretty hard to turn that corner against this defense. But the reality is, he's going to have to make some plays in this one. Against this good of a run defense, he's going to have to be the guy that's going to make a lot of these plays. And he's come up short a couple of different times. And the quarterback situation for Tennessee is getting more complicated as the week goes on. Chris Felico reported yesterday that Nico was very unlikely to go. Now others have said there's no decision made. Even others have said he should be ready to go. So I don't really know what's going to happen there. Gaston Moore is a capable quarterback. If it was in Neyland Stadium, I'd feel a lot better about Nico not playing. It being in Sanford makes me a little bit nervous about this kid. If he goes out there, if Gaston Moore is the guy that's leading them the entire way, that place is going to be on fire, and I can't imagine he's not going to struggle just a little bit with that. So definitely something to watch there. It's going to be a little bit of a battle for him to deal with that. And then despite UGA's struggles, the defense has played really good football. There's never really been a game where they've been absolutely blown out of the water defensively. There's been games where they've missed the mark here and there. I mean, Alabama was terrible to start that game, obviously. But at the end of the day, this has been a really good defense, getting better throughout the years. And frankly, I think they put on the best defensive performance of anyone the entire year when they went to Texas a couple of weeks ago. So it is in there. There is a team in there that can play at a very elite level. We just haven't seen it nearly enough, and that's the big question as we head into this one. And the run game, both offensively and defensively, huge advantage to Tennessee. Maybe defensively, not quite as much of an advantage, but you do have the leading rusher in the SEC in Dylan Sampson. You have the 12th best rushing defense in the country, and while Georgia is top 20, I believe, in run defense, they're below 100 in terms of teams in the country when it comes to rush yards per game. So they're in a really, really tough spot where that pass game is just going to have to answer questions. It's just going to have to make more plays. There can't be drops. There can't be mistakes. And there especially can't be picks from Carson Beck. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one. It's a huge game where Tennessee can outright bury UGA and possibly turn the tide in this rivalry. Georgia has a chance to possibly punch their ticket to the CFP 1 week after it being kind of all out there and all up in the air of sorts. But it's an all chips in the center of the table type of game. It is an all-in type of game. You're just going to have to see who comes out of this probably fist fight, who comes out on top, and that team probably has a really good shot at the CFP. The losing team is in a weird spot going forward, no doubt about that. Players to watch, you got to watch Squirrel White. I think this is the game changer for Tennessee in this game because you've seen the Georgia defense. They've been absolutely incredible pretty much all year. One place where they've struggled just a little bit is when the other team has an elite slot receiver. When they have a guy that can absolutely get downfield, that can make all the gadget plays, that can do all the little things that make it really tough for you to key in on one guy. So someone like Squirrel White, where you can get him on end arounds, you can get him on jet sweeps, you can get him to going downfield and hit a couple of those big plays that you're very much going to need in this game. I think it makes it so much easier for someone like Dylan Sampson to operate against a defense that is very good, against a defense that is good at stopping the run. You're going to need to be able to spread them out, and Squirrel White's exactly how you do that. And then obviously James Pierce Jr. You just saw this offensive line for Georgia really struggle for the past couple of weeks, and now they get the best pass rusher in the country to go up against. So it's going to be a load for them to deal with. There's no doubt about that, and he's one of those guys that can just totally take over this game, a la JTT in the 2020 Ohio State-Penn State game. It could be like that on Saturday if James Pierce Jr. can really get his feet under him and totally take over this game. Oh, excuse me about that. Lawson Lucky is someone else that I think is hugely important in this game because I think for Georgia to be successful in the pass game, it's got to be some moving the pocket. It's got to be some bootlegs to tight ends. It's got to be some relatively easy things at the end of the day for Carson Beck early in this game. And then on top of that, I think he's someone that really is a matchup nightmare for a lot of different linebackers out there, for a lot of different DBs out there. If Boo Carter is going to have to end up guarding him, it's going to be a load for that guy to deal with. So I do think that Lawson Lucky, while you have, so many issues at the wide receiver position, at the running back position, I think this is a guy that could really help this offense. And when they've had really big offensive games, he's been at the center of it a lot of the time. And then you got Nazir Stackhouse, the defensive tackle for Georgia. He is someone that I think is huge for this game because if you don't at least slow down Dylan Sampson, you are not going to win this game. If he gets rolling downhill, if he can get over 100, 150 yards, you are absolutely cooked, and it's not going to be very, very close. Tennessee is going to be able to essentially bury you in this game. Now, Nazir Stackhouse in that front seven has been really good at stopping the run, so they should be up for the challenge, but it starts with that guy. It starts with the leader of that front seven, and definitely someone that needs to have one of the best games, if not the best game of the year for them to win this one. But moving to Tennessee's keys to the game, because there's quite a few of them. I think the biggest one is the pass rush just needs to be in attack mode. They have 22 sacks on the season. James Pierce Jr. has 5.5 himself, and this O-line has gave up 5 sacks last week to Ole Miss. It's a team that you can get after. It's a team, an offensive line in particular, that you can really attack and possibly get to the quarterback a couple of times. So I do think they go into attack mode and just trust the guys on the back end, especially if Georgia's going to drop some balls or miss some receivers, or Carson Beck's not going to see the hook coverage defender. It's a way you can totally change this game. And Carson Beck under pressure, very different quarterback than when he's totally clean. And then you got to hit a couple of deep plays in the pass game, whether that's Nico or Gaston Moore on the field. You have to find deep balls in this game. You have to be able to get behind the defense just a couple of times, and Georgia has shown to be prone to that a couple of times in the Alabama game. They got a couple of times during Ole Miss. It's one of those things that if you can hit 1, 2, maybe even 3 of these, you can probably open up enough run lanes for Dylan Sampson to get going, and that's the third key. It's got to be the Dylan Sampson show, especially with the uncertainty at quarterback. You need to hit those big shots, don't get me wrong, but it's got to be him. He's got to be the guy that's leading the way. He's got to be the guy that's carrying the load like he has pretty much all season. So it's going to be really interesting to see just how much Georgia keys in on that and if they're able to stop him, because no one really has been able to yet. But moving on to how Georgia gets it done, no unforced errors. Georgia has 29 drops this year. They average 6.3 penalties per game, good for 78th in the country. They've lost 3 fumbles in the last 2 games. That cannot happen. They cannot hurt themselves on Saturday, because the reality is Tennessee's going to be right there to take all your worries, all of your mistakes, and take them back for touchdowns. That's what they do. They are very good at defense. They are very opportunistic. If you allow them openings, they will take them and they will say thank you. So you're going to have to be very careful and just not beat yourself. You are plenty good enough there to where if you are playing even football, if you're not giving the ball away, if you're not having drops, if you're not having big-time penalties, you can beat this team just straight up. If you start handing them things, then things get a little bit sketchy, and then Tennessee's big-time offense can make a couple of those big-time plays that we talked about. But the other part of this is pass protection. We talked about that Tennessee pass rush. You just got to play your best game of the year. If you're this O-line, it needs to be this entire week. It needs to be as laser-focused as you ever have been this year, and it needs to be coming out there with a vengeance. You cannot play this game if your offensive line cannot block. You will not be able to get any rhythm going. You will have to fight for every single play that you get, and I promise you, it will be an ugly game from the jump for Georgia. So this offensive line needs to play the best football they've played all year, and if they don't, James Pierce Jr. and friends is totally going to feast on you. And then make Nico or Gaston, depending on who's out there, make them beat you. That's the goal of Saturday. Do everything you can to stop Dylan Sampson. Do everything you can to stop number 6. And then you'll see what happens on the back end. You have very good coverage corners. You have wide receivers on the other side that, while very talented, might not be those one-on-one beaters that a lot of other teams have had, like Ole Miss or like Texas. So I think you're in a position here like Alabama. Ryan Williams, one of the best one-on-one beaters in the entire country. So you're in a position where stop the head of the monster, cut off the head of the dragon. See what happens after that. You have an ability to hang up on the back end, but can't really do that if Dylan Sampson is being able to tear off 4 yards a run or 5 yards a run, and then you have to drop more guys into the box. That's when Tennessee starts to beat you. So I think that's going to be a huge thing. Just make that guy beat you. And frankly, a lot of things go in Tennessee's direction in this game. A whole lot of things make me think that Tennessee is going to win this football game. I'm going to make Georgia prove it to me. I'm going to make Georgia prove me wrong and show me that they are not the normal Georgia team. I'm going to make them entirely prove it to me, because there's this thing in the back of my head that just says Kirby Smart is getting into these kids this week, that they're going to come out with their hair on fire, and that defense is going to play as good of football as they have played all year. I'll be totally honest, I don't really have a good reason for it. I can't sit here and give you a ton of stats. I can't sit here and give you a ton of reasoning for this happening. What I can say is Georgia's back is up against the wall, and no one operates better than with their back up against the wall than Kirby Smart. So I'm going to go with Georgia here. I know it might sound a little bit crazy, and when you look at the metrics, it definitely does look crazy. And Tennessee would not be surprised if they were able to go into Athens and win this game. But I'm going to make Georgia prove it to me. I'm going to make them prove that they are not the normal Georgia team, that they are not the same Kirby Smart team. and I don't think they will. I think they will win this game. I think they will really make a statement and likely will be in that 12-team field at the end of this thing, and Tennessee's hopes will be in a weird place after this game. We'll just leave it at that. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we got to get into this big noon kickoff controversy. There are a lot of angry fans up there in the Big Ten, and I'll tell you why some of their anger is a little bit misguided, but we'll talk about it right after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about that Georgia-Tennessee game, a huge one down there in Athens, Georgia. I am going to pick Georgia to win. I'm going to pick the backup against the wall dogs. I don't feel great about it. I'll be totally honest with you, but I'm going to go with Kirby Smart. I'm going to make them prove to me that this is not a normal Georgia team. So we'll see what happens there, but let's get into this big noon controversy. We will get into a couple more games right after this, but this has been a really interesting thing going on around the college football world over the last couple of days, and there's been quite a bit of anger up there in the Big Ten country. So let's get into this. And big noon kickoff. You know about it. You've heard about it. You've seen it a lot of the time. It is Fox's big time, college football pregame show, and then obviously the noon kick has become kind of the main slot for Fox and really the Big Ten over the last couple of years. So you've seen big time games. You've seen Ohio State, Penn State on there a number of times. We'll see Ohio State, Indiana in a couple of weeks. We saw Ohio State, Penn State a couple weeks back, and we'll see Ohio State, Michigan in a couple of weeks here. So obviously it is the marquee game in the Big Ten, and Big Ten fans seem to not like that very much, and it really started when Ohio State, Penn State were forced to play at noon, and the whiteout for Penn State was have to move to another slot, and that was against Washington. In that game last week, they had to play at nighttime for the whiteout. Problem was, it was on Peacock, and no disrespect to Peacock, no disrespect to NBC, the presentation left a lot to be desired. It was not quite that you're watching the whiteout, here it all is in all of its glory type of feel that you'd love to see from a whiteout production. So nothing against NBC, is just to say you're on Peacock for the whiteout doesn't quite feel right if you're a college football fan, especially if you're a Penn State fan. So that's where all of this kind of started. And then you had Ohio State kind of get in on the party. And that was what happened really this past weekend when you had Ohio State, Indiana was announced to be that noon game. You had a lot of people get a little bit upset. And it really is just more than half of the games that Ohio State will play this year are at noon, and I think their entire back half of their schedule will be at noon. So a little bit different for one of the best teams in the country, one of the biggest brands, one of the most talented teams in the country. Not playing night games is a little bit weird. The other part of this that does need to be kind of factored in here is Oregon can't play noon games pretty much all year. They can't play noon games because it's too darn early. They're not going to kick off at 9 a.m. over there in Eugene, Oregon, so you can't do it for Washington. So you can't do it for USC, and you can't do it for UCLA. That has created a little bit of a problem where it's pretty much Ohio State, Penn State, and that's about it. Indiana has helped out a little bit this year. Michigan has not. So it's been a little bit of a battle back and forth, and it also begun a little bit because, I wanted to get to a little bit different of a picture, but at the end of the day, it has begun in that different type of way because Utah, Colorado is in Boulder this weekend. It is the big noon kickoff at 10 a.m., which sounds absolutely crazy. I think it is a very bad idea, but as of right now, that is the way it's going to go down, and we'll see how all of that unfolds. Maybe that's a reason to go for Utah in that game. But at the end of the day, it is going to be really interesting to watch this. And the big problem with this isn't necessarily that noon kickoffs or, terrible or the worst thing that's ever happened, although some Penn State fans would tell you that. It's just to say, these are huge recruiting weekends. We're getting into a stretch of the season where you have huge games, huge conference games, and you have an ability to get some kids that you really want on your team to campus, have them have the full experience, really enjoy their time. A kid playing a game on a Friday night has to get all the way to a college campus at noon for a noon kickoff, has to get, say, to State College or Columbus, Ohio, coming from even Cincinnati, Ohio. It is a lot to do, and it doesn't give you that full weekend of recruiting. It doesn't give you that full experience that you would have at other universities like LSU, like Alabama, like Georgia. This upcoming weekend, they're having a lot of guys come in for that recruiting weekend, and next weekend when Indiana plays Ohio State, won't be quite as good. It will still be a lot of kids there. It still will be a huge recruiting piece for them, but it does create a recruiting disadvantage. Even in the Big Ten, it creates a recruiting disadvantage because Oregon, your big games, you're probably going to get at night. You're probably going to get in that NBC slot. Everyone else, you're probably going to get at the Fox slot, and that kind of puts you in a weird spot where Oregon, not only are they probably pushing the biggest check around, but at the end of the day, they also are getting the best slots for them to have those recruiting weekends, and all of this is a little bit ticky-tacky. I understand that, but it absolutely can have different effects on this team, on different programs, and definitely can be one of those things that really hurts you in the long run overall and could hurt this conference in the long run if they are really that mad about this Fox setup. So going to be interesting to watch, but the big question here is who's at fault for all this? There's that Colorado-Utah picture I was looking for, but who's at fault for all this is a pretty easy answer. I'll be totally honest with you. There are a lot of people mad at Fox. There's a lot of people putting anger towards Joel Klatt, putting anger towards Gus Johnson, all of the people over there. You're probably wrong to do that. This media deal was very, very specific. When the Big Ten signed it a couple of years ago, when Kevin Warren and all of his guys signed it, he's no longer there for obvious reasons. But the way that it's set up is Fox, you get the noon slot. CBS, you get the 3:30 slot. NBC, you get the 7:30 slot. That is the way it works. No matter what, no matter the week, and it does not change. And Fox tends to get the first choice every single week. So that's the reality of the situation. If you're Fox and you cannot move out of the noon slot, you're not just going to take the inferior game so everyone gets that night game. You're not just going to take, Purdue, Wisconsin so that Ohio State, Penn State can be on a totally different channel and they can get all the riches from that. So they're doing exactly what everyone else would do. They're doing exactly what everyone else would do in their scenario where you just got to take the best game, whether it's at noon, because a lot of the sentiment out there has been, we know that you'll put it at noon because we'll watch either way. Exactly. They're going to have to pick the best game because they know you're going to watch, they know that you're going to turn it on, and they need that money, and they feel like they deserve that money. So while I understand being upset at Fox, I totally get it. I totally get being understand, and somewhat the product has been a little bit lackluster this year. I totally understand that. But at the end of the day, it's a lot of just the decision makers at the Big Ten putting themselves in a position where the contract that you signed almost guarantees that you're going to have noon games that are the biggest games of the weekend. So I think it's kind of Kevin Warren's fault. I think it's kind of the Big Ten office's fault, and Tony Petitti has a chance to kind of right the ship just a little bit here. It's going to be really hard to do, no doubt about that. But the other part of this that people that are kind of at fault that goes beyond the league offices, it's just the teams. Sometimes the teams just aren't good enough. The dichotomy in the Big Ten is very, very clear and has been clear for really the last decade. It's been Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, and everyone else. And now Oregon has jumped into that mix. Obviously, Indiana trying to build up into that mix. But that's the reality of this conference. It is those couple of teams up top, and then pretty much no one else. No disrespect to Illinois, no disrespect to Minnesota or Rutgers or Purdue or all of these teams. They're great teams. They're not great brands. That's just the reality of the situation. So you look at the SEC, even last week, you had Ole Miss, Georgia at 3:30, and then you had Bama, LSU. You had two matchups that were massive for the CFP, that always were going to be massive. And then in the Big Ten this year, it's been, okay, we got Oregon, Ohio State. Then you wait a couple of weeks. Okay, we got Penn State, Ohio State. Then you wait a couple of weeks. Okay, we got Ohio State, Indiana. Then we'll get Ohio State, Michigan. But that game's not even huge this year. So you're putting yourself in a position where, yes, Fox is going to take the very best game of the week because that's the only place they can take it. They can only be at noon. That's the way the media contract works. And frankly, they're not going to take Minnesota, Illinois just so everyone else can see that a game at night. That's just never going to happen. So what does need to happen is they need to rethink this thing one way or the other. They need to find a way to move forward and sort of quote-unquote fix it, I suppose. And I think the best way to do it is really just have the TV networks rotate slots throughout the year, whether that's Fox moving to 7 p.m. one week and NBC taking the noon slot or vice versa and playing around with that a little bit. I think CBS would probably like to stay at 3:30, but who knows? Maybe there's a little bit of wiggle room there. Allow teams to rotate the first choice. Allow NBC to sometimes get the first choice of what game they're going to broadcast, not just Fox every week, as if you are going to stay at noon for Fox, then we should rotate around that a little bit because this is the only reality we have right about now. And then make a benchmark for night games for the teams in each conference, or especially in the Big Ten, because you have an Ohio State team. They're going to play, I think, 8 or 9 noon games. That's not a team that should play 8 or 9 noon games. I understand most fans, and I'm 100% sure that Ryan Day and those players don't much care when they play. But at the end of the day, it does matter. It is a big deal for this conference. It is a big deal for all of these different schools and a lot of the recruiting ability for these schools. So it sounds like a tedious thing. It sounds like something that you shouldn't be yelling at. It sounds like something that it's kind of old man yelling at the cloud type of problems, obviously. But when you look at the Big Ten, you have the whiteout. You have one of the best atmospheres in all of the sport. You have one of those things that every time you watch it, it is always really special to watch. Other than this year, it just really wasn't fun to watch. It didn't feel like you were watching the whiteout. It didn't feel like a special moment in college football. And that's just wrong. So whatever you need to do to fix that, whether it's making sure that Fox gets a couple of night slots throughout the year, or it just means rotating the choices for all of these networks every single week. Obviously, at the end of all this, the same thing we talk about pretty much every time we talk about a change in college football is the reality is the people making the decisions, the people at those media companies, at CBS, at NBC, at Fox, would have to just say, let's forego some money for this to happen. They would have to say, let's just say the fans are more important than our pocketbooks. And let's be honest, they don't do that very often. So I wouldn't necessarily hold your breath here. I wouldn't necessarily, if you're a Penn State fan, I wouldn't necessarily expect anything different next year when you play Ohio State. But Tony Petitti has a shot here. Get on the phone with CBS, NBC, Fox, and just see what they say. Maybe they'll laugh you off the phone and hang up. Maybe they'll say, that's crazy. There's no way we're giving up the agreement that we have. I don't know, maybe the goodness of people's hearts will come through. But the reality is, it does need to be fixed, whether it's this year or next year or the year after that. They need to find a way to get Ohio State, Penn State at night with the whiteout happening, because that's what college football is. We can't just have all of the night games, all of the marquee night games at the very least, be that LSU, Alabama, be the Tennessee, Georgia, be all the games in the SEC, because then it's going to reinforce what the SEC already is, which is kind of pulling away from a lot of different people. So it's going to be interesting to watch all of this unfold, and obviously hope to see more night games in the Big Ten coming forward, at least more elite night games coming forward. And that's the job of a lot of people. It's the job of Tony Petitti. It's the job of the media companies. It's the job of the teams themselves, just playing a little bit better football. But at the end of the day, we'll see what happens in the next coming years, and I'm sure one way or another, we will still have a couple of Penn State and Ohio State fans none too happy with Fox. But we'll figure it out in time, and we'll take our second break here. And when we come back, we got to break down a couple of big-time games this upcoming weekend. I think Oregon at Wisconsin is a little bit of a sketchy spot for Oregon. And then South Carolina, Missouri, technically an elimination game in the CFP, but could outright be not important. But I'll break it down right after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about, We just talked about that Big Noon controversy that is kind of sweeping around the Big Ten right about now. I'm sure it's something that will likely be yelled about for quite some time, and I'll leave it at that for the time being. We'll update you if there's any good updates to be had there, but let's get into some big game picks. And I think that Oregon-Wisconsin game, it is the biggest game in the Big Ten this week, and it is at night, so that's the good news for Big Ten fans out there. But the not good news is that is your best game of the week. So another example of why you got some work to do, let's just put it that way, with some of the teams in that conference. But at the end of the day, I do think it's a really interesting game. And then Mizzou, South Carolina is just one that could have all the implications in the world, could not mean anything at the end of the day. But we'll get to that here in a second. Let's start with that Oregon-Wisconsin game over there in Camp Randall. And this is a very, very interesting one. It could outright send Oregon to the Big Ten championship. They win this one, they can still afford a loss in that last game of the year against Washington. They don't want to lose that game for obvious reasons, but at the end of the day, they can afford a loss there and still find their way to Indy. So a win here gets them into Indy, probably sets them up for a rematch, maybe against Ohio State. Maybe they'll get Indiana for the first time this year, depending on what happens in that game next week. But it is a really interesting one. This is the third time that they have gone on the road to a new Big Ten stadium. First time was a Friday night in West Lafayette. We tried to make that one interesting. It wasn't quite as interesting as we wanted it to be. Then it was over to the Big House, and there was a minor scare before a just downright ridiculous fourth down call near the goal line. There was a little bit of a scare there in the Big House for Oregon this year, but Camp Randall on a Saturday night is going to be different. It's going to be really, really interesting to watch what this Oregon team has, and they've been laser focused all year, so I'm not super worried about them, but it definitely will be a factor in this game. And for Wisconsin, you got to rely on your run game. And as crazy as that sounds, because Oregon is only 2 positions behind Iowa that absolutely stifled you last week, but the reality is you're not beating this team when it's just Braden Locke, when it's just this past game trying to go punch for punch with Dylan Gabriel. I can almost promise you that it is not going to go very beautifully. But I do think Oregon's game plan will be relatively similar. Wisconsin's pass defense is one of the best in the country. They have gotten a couple of different games, including that USC one against Miller Moss, so maybe something to watch. Maybe there's a couple more openings than it seems to be on paper. But at the end of the day, I do think Oregon's going to try to run the ball in this game. They got Jordan James going. Noah Whittington had a great week last week, and we'll talk about him here in a second, but that's the reality. I do think this is going to be a game that one way or another is one on the ground, and I think for Wisconsin, you're really just looking for a spark plug for this program. It's felt like this program has been kind of in the mud this year. They've been able to play some good football at times. They got the injury to Tyler Van Dyke early on in the year that put him in a weird place. Ches Malusi goes down and puts him in another weird place. So they've had a lot of tough stuff to overcome, but the reality is they got to have that one moment. Luke Fickell is losing a lot of these fans. He's losing a lot of that energy in that fan base, and if he can win this one, it's all right back to normal, and then you can really attack 2025. But if they lose and possibly lose out, they're in a really, really tough position going forward. But for Oregon, it's just about, sealing the fate that you started in week 1, doing everything that you've wanted to do really from when you got the news that you were joining the Big Ten. It was always, we want to win it in year 1. This would be a step towards that. So can the desperation help Wisconsin get this huge win, or will Oregon just kind of continue that death march that they've been on? But to do that, I think Noah Whittington's going to have a huge game. He is a huge player for this team, had a great game last week, and he's one of those guys that just totally opens up this offense. They are so dangerous down the field passing the ball with Evan Stewart coming on and Tez Johnson and all of the different wide receivers they have. This is a kid that is so dangerous out of the backfield, and while you're worrying about even Jordan James over him, he can still make all the plays in the world. So I think he's one of those guys that has kind of been a little bit of an unsung player for them, but in the return game, in the run game, he's going to be huge, and he could just make that one huge play in this one to kind of silence that crowd. Then you got Jordan Burch, and this is someone that obviously Dan Lanning trusts a lot. He had that little fake punt last week, and if that's going to happen again, it probably will be Jordan Burch again, because that dude flew downfield. He is so athletic. He is such an incredible athlete that it's one of those players that you really just got to put in the right situations. You really just got to give him that one-on-one on the outside. You got to give him that one chance to make that big-time play. he usually makes it. He's a really remarkable player, and ever since he's come over to Oregon has become more and more of that incredible player that he's been capable of being really his entire career. And then CJ Williams on the other side, I stand pat in thinking that this is your best physical matchup when you play these elite teams across the country. He's about 6'3", over 200 pounds, a very physical receiver. And when you have guys like Jabbar Muhammad on the other side, you need someone that can just physically match up. You have players on this team. You have Will Pauling. You have a lot of guys that can make plays. This is the guy that can just go up through one of these defenders and make a big-time play. That is who he is, and he's definitely someone that I think if Wisconsin's going to get it done, they got to make some plays through the pass game. It can't just be the run game, especially because you're going up against one of the best run defenses in the country. So you're fighting a battle here, one way or the other, but I think this is a physical guy that could go up and make that one play that totally changes this game for Wisconsin. And then you got Preston Zachman on the back end of that defense, and along with Hunter Wohler, and those guys are huge in this game. The safeties, whether it's in run support or just roving the back end, trying to make that one big play, they are absolutely massive. They need to get turnovers. They need to get big plays, and that back end, is very, very talented and has every ability to get a couple of those big-time plays that they're going to need, but it starts with Zachman, it starts with Hunter Wohler, and then everyone else got to hold their weight as well. It's a huge challenge, but those two veteran safeties in the middle make that a little bit easier, that's for sure. But some keys to the game. Can Braden Locke step up to the plate? Can he be up for the challenge in this one? Because he's going to have to make plays one way or another. Wisconsin does need their run game to lead the way. I don't think they win this game if their run game cannot get going. But Braden Locke also probably has to have his best game of the year, just plain and period. He probably does have to be kind of slinging the rock around, making a couple of big-time plays, and is he up for that, especially with an elite defensive line on the other side? Is he up for that? Can his offensive line give him enough time to even be up for that challenge? So that's going to be interesting to watch. And then Oregon at Camp Randall is always going to be interesting. This is the first time they've gone on the road at night to anyone not named Purdue. So I think it's going to be a very interesting game, and one of those that maybe this is where you get to them just a little bit. Maybe this is where their confidence and their focus and everything kind of lapses just for a little bit, and Wisconsin has that opening. It's going to be tough, but Camp Randall can definitely help you out on the way there. And then we talked about it. That Wisconsin O-line against this Oregon D-line, it's going to be huge. From pass pro to run blocking, they got to win the line of scrimmage one way or the other, or at least hold even. They can't get absolutely dominated, kind of in the way that Ohio State did at different points in that game. That cannot happen for Wisconsin. They have to be able to hold up. It is going to be a Herculean task. Let's just be totally honest. That is one of the best defensive lines in the country, but they're just going to have to do it one way or another if they're going to want to get this win. And frankly, I think it's going to be really tough to get the win. I do think this is going to be a little bit closer. I think Wisconsin has a little bit of guts. I think their back is up against the wall just a little bit here, and I think they're going to respond pretty well. I don't think they're going to get this win. I think Oregon's going to be able to get it, and maybe Wisconsin gets a late touchdown to make it look a little bit nicer than it will be, but at the end of the day, I do think it'll be a fun one, and I think Wisconsin's a little bit more of a live dog than some people are giving them credit for. But moving on to another game that is as confusing as just about anyone on the board, which is Missouri going to South Carolina for a huge one this weekend. And it's a really interesting matchup that could have tons of consequences or none at all. And the reality is, if Missouri were to win out, they could not be in. If South Carolina were to win out, they could not even be close to be in. And I would be very surprised if they were in the CFP if they win out. That talk has been going around. It's probably not happening, but it could affect some others in this conference, and that's kind of the crazy part about it, where you have a position where if Missouri were to lose 2 out of the next 3, if they were to lose this weekend and then say lose to Arkansas at the end of the year, LSU were to win out, Alabama were to win out, and Georgia were to win this weekend, LSU would go to the SEC championship. So the reality is LSU is a big South Carolina team this weekend. If they can get this win, it puts Missouri on a little bit of a tough path, and then you continue moving forward. You see if you can get those wins, and then maybe it's LSU that ends up getting a chance at Atlanta. That sounds crazy, but it would start this weekend. If Missouri wins this game, then I believe any chance LSU has is officially out the window. But definitely will be interesting to watch, and South Carolina is favored in this game. So it's going to be really interesting to watch that unfold. And really, for South Carolina, I think the biggest thing here is you got to send a message. That's the job this weekend, and really the job for the rest of the year, including that Clemson game. You got to win by a lot. You got to win by 21 points. You got to win by 20 next week. You got to win by 20 against Clemson. it's got to be really convincing. And it's got to be absolutely slap you in the face impressive in these games, because the reality is you're going to be 9-3 at best, and you're going to be in a position where you have a lot of 10-2 teams in your conference that are going to be above you. I do think there are a couple of teams in there that they could jump at 9-3, like say a 10-2 Texas. I think they could. You could easily argue to me that South Carolina would deserve to be above them. But at the end of the day, there's not quite too many around there. You have Alabama. You lost to them. You could have LSU. You lost to them. You have a couple of other teams that you could have. Ole Miss. You lost to them. So you're in a really tough position. So it's about just really proving a point, really showing that you are one of the best teams in the country. I'd be shocked if they can do it, but this weekend is where it starts. And then Missouri's in the exact same place, because I think a lot of people, including myself, and I bet a lot of people in that room, have already kind of written off Missouri. And it's not to say that they don't have a shot to make the CFP, but let's be totally honest. They really need to put on a show the next couple of weeks. They need to prove that they would be outright better than a 10-2 Tennessee, let's just say, or a 10-2 Ole Miss. They need to prove that, and they have not at all recently. So definitely something to watch. Will Brady Cook be able to go is a big-time question, because if he does, I think this game changes in a hurry. The thing is, it sounds like Drew Pine is preparing as the starter, and I expect him to be the starter this upcoming weekend. He's coming off a solid game from Oklahoma, but this is a defensive line that's going to get after him pretty quickly, and it's going to be interesting to see how he kind of handles that. But this is going to be an interesting game to watch, because we just don't know what the implications are. If South Carolina wins, we know it helps out LSU, but LSU still got to handle their business. So if they lose, then it won't matter at all, really. If Missouri were to win out, maybe they get in, and maybe craziness happens above them. But at the end of the day, you're looking at this game, and it looks like a really big ranked matchup, and maybe at the end of the day, it's a blip on the radar, but it could be a huge game. So it's kind of a fun one to break down. But players to watch, I think Marcus Carroll for Missouri is huge in this game. You know that you don't have the quarterback. You know you don't have necessarily the quarterback run game that you would have with Brady Cook. It's got to be these running backs. It's got to be Marcus Carroll. It's got to be Nate Noel. And Marcus Carroll is the guy that can kind of abuse some people when he's running through holes, and I think he's going to be huge in this game just to get a little bit of that wear-down effect on the South Carolina defense. That's probably the only way you're going to be able to slow down this defensive front. And then the linebacker, Tristan Newsome, I think is massive. He had a sack and 2.5 tackles for loss last week, and I think he's one of those players that just totally makes everything on that defense just go. It makes it so much easier to handle everything that's thrown at you. And you look at the South Carolina run game, it's all about misdirection. It's all about Lenore Sellers making that one read and then getting out on the edge. You're going to be chasing that guy a lot on Saturday, and you're going to have to make a couple of plays in open field, and even against this guy. And he's really hard to get down. Rocket Sanders is one of the most physical running backs in the entire SEC, really in the entire country, and him along with Lenore Sellers has made for one of the most lethal running attacks in the entire country this year. So Missouri has a huge challenge in front of them. If they let Rocket Sanders get going, it's going to be a really long day at the office for the Tigers. And then you got Tonka Hemingway in the middle of that defense for South Carolina. I think he's a guy that is just so athletic. He's so versatile. He can do so many different things. He can rush the passer. But at the end of the day, I think the job for him is just to run stop on Saturday. I think if you're South Carolina and you can say, without a doubt, we can stop the run no matter what, you're going to win this football game. There's no way that Drew Pine's going to go out there and outright win a football game in South Carolina Stadium. That's just not going to happen. So if you're able to stop the run with Tonka Hemingway and a lot of these defensive tackles, you're going to have a lot of success, especially when you can drop guys back into coverage, because that's when Nick Emanwari or Kilgore or some of these players on the back end make that big-time play and totally change this one. But some keys to this game. Missouri's pass pro has to be perfect, just plain simple. It has to be perfect. These pass rushers for South Carolina are just too talented. They're just too scary, and especially with your backup quarterback, if you're going to allow him to get home a couple of times, this one's going to get ugly. It's going to get ugly exactly like that A&M game got ugly, and maybe even worse than that one. So you're going to have to be careful in this one, and I think Missouri's in a position where they just got to the O-line's got to play otherworldly, really, on Saturday. And then Lenore Sellers' magic. It is special. Watching this kid right now is so much fun to watch. He has over 200 yards passing in back-to-back games, had 100 yards rushing against A&M, had, I believe, 3 touchdowns last week, 4 against A&M. He's been remarkable. Really, since he's returned from that injury, he's been absolutely incredible, and he's one of those guys that, as South Carolina tries and claws to make a case for the CFP, he's going to be at the very center of it, and he might just put on another show in Williams-Brice Stadium, and that's the last key to this game, because this is one of the best atmospheres in the entire college football world when it is at night and when all of these fans are fully engaged, and they very much will be on Saturday. It is going to be absolutely crazy, and I can't imagine Drew Pyne's going to be fully ready for that atmosphere that's going to be thrown at them. And frankly, I think this one's going to get ugly. I think South Carolina's offense is absolutely humming right now. I think Missouri's offense is one of those things where you're going to be able to make a couple of plays. Luther Burden is a very talented player, Mookie Cooper as well. Theo Weiss had a great game last week, but at the end of the day, that defensive line is going to get home a couple of times. Missouri's just not going to have the guys to counter them, especially on defense, and I think South Carolina gets a big-time win here. I think Missouri continues to skid, and this talk around them possibly making the playoff will finally be put to bed. So I do think South Carolina wins that game. I think Oregon barely wins that game against Wisconsin. I think that one's going to be really, really interesting at the end of the week. But let's take our third break here. And when we come back, we got a couple of Big 12 games I want to break down for you. We have one little upset alert with Utah at Colorado, and then Arizona State, Kansas State is an outright elimination game in the Big 12, and we'll break it down right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some huge games, one in the Big Ten, one in the SEC. We have Oregon going over to Wisconsin as well as Missouri trying to stay alive in the CFP race every which way they can, going over to South Carolina. I do have Oregon and South Carolina in those games, but those other teams are very, very much alive and will be really fun games to watch unfold. But we got some Big 12 games that we got to get to here really quickly, and I did pick Utah, Colorado over BYU, Kansas, and I'm conflicted about it. I fought myself quite a bit on this one, but I do think that game up there in Boulder is a really interesting one to break down, so let's go ahead and get into it. And I think the biggest thing here is Colorado is just looking for that next physical win is the best way that I can describe it, because they've been so good all year at stepping up to the plate every time they need to up their physicality, every time they need to, meet a team where they are and, return a punch that a team has given them. They've been able to do that, and it's been really incredible to watch. I think the one thing here that might be a little bit different is you look back at the season for Colorado. They've been really good at playing physical football. The two teams that have gotten them in those categories have been Nebraska and Kansas State. The two teams that have beaten them, those are the two most physical teams they've played, without a doubt. And Utah is right up with that group. So that's the big-time question here. Is there a threshold, I suppose, in the Colorado world where we can handle this level of physicality, but the second you go a little bit over that, becomes a little bit too much for us? It'll be interesting to watch if they've been able to develop that throughout the year, and obviously they've become more physical throughout the year, no doubt about that. They've been much better than they were in the Nebraska game, but at the end of the day, that Kansas State game still showed us that it can happen. They can get gashed on the ground. They can get pushed around just a little bit still, and maybe Utah's a team that can do that. And I think the big thing here is Utah is the top 25 pass defense in the country, allowing under 200 yards per game. Now, the Colorado pass game doesn't much care about that. They've been really, really good regardless of how good the defense is on the other side, but a huge reason for that is the edge rushers that they have. Logan Fano is an absolute beast. Van Fillinger has 6 sacks on the year, so you're in a position where maybe this is a game where they can really get after Shedeur Sanders, where in the last couple of games he's been able to kind of stand back there, survey the field, get a little bit more comfortable, and then execute the offense, which he's been doing at a ridiculously high level. But you push him off his spot a little bit, maybe you have a little bit more of an opening, and this Colorado offense gets just a little bit stuck in the mud at times. Also, they have 8 interceptions on the year, does Utah. So you're in a position where maybe they can get after you and then force a couple of those mistakes and totally take advantage of them on the other side. So it's going to be interesting if Colorado can handle this physicality, if Utah has the physicality to give, because that game last week was a lot. It was a huge emotional win where they battled to the end and came out on the wrong side and had a call that they feel like was the wrong one late in that game that can be really demoralizing. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in this one. And I think Colorado is in a position where maybe they can just out-athlete Utah. Maybe their pass game is just that talented, that shifty, that fast, that it's going to be just too much for Utah to keep up with. For Utah, this is a Michael Bernard game. One way or the other, he's going to have to lead you to victory here because the uncertainty at quarterback is huge. Brandon Rose is out for the season, so you're just going to have to figure it out at that quarterback position. I think it will be Isaac Wilson kicking back over under center, but the reality is it wasn't all that pretty of football when he was out there earlier in the year. So they're going to need to run the football and take the air out of the ball, and that's just the reality whenever you play Colorado, really, but especially with the Utah situation at quarterback. But more than anything, this is the moment for Kansas. This is the moment for Colorado. This is the moment where a lot of stuff really becomes real. And obviously, it's already become real in a lot of different respects. They are very much a contender in the Big 12. I expect them to probably be in Arlington at the end of the year, but they got to get through this one. They got to push any disaster to that game against Kansas, and by that time, Kansas could be entirely out of the race for a bowl game. Maybe you get them at the right time then. So you're in a position where this could be the final game where you really push, where you really get that huge win, and then maybe you win next week against Kansas. Maybe there's a couple of losses to Kansas State and Iowa State, and you're sitting pretty at the last week. Obviously, it seems like they're going to have to push through that last weekend, but this is a huge game, and if they can get it, I think the confidence would just be huge going into those last 2 weeks. But some players to watch. I think Isaiah Augustave is a huge player in this game for Colorado. When you look at this Colorado run game, it's not going to be huge. It's not going to be a huge factor in this game. It hasn't been a huge factor in most games that Colorado's played all year. But the reality is you're going to need a little bit. You're going to need just enough from that run game to get everything going in the pass game that Utah is really going to be able to slow down if they can stop that run game with only 4 or 5 guys up front. If they're able to drop a ton of guys back in coverage, they have talented guys that can make some plays. They have Cameron Calhoun, they have Teo Johnson that absolutely can make some plays on those back ends. But if you can get that run game going, then the openings happen in that pass game, and then you just cannot be stopped. I'll be totally honest. But the other guy, Amari McNeil, is someone I want you to watch. He is a beast on the defensive tackle position and someone that has really kind of come on throughout the year. Wasn't necessarily that huge player coming in, but definitely has become one for Colorado, and one guy that I think could totally wreck this game for Utah if he's able to stop the run the way that he was last week. He was absolutely incredible, and I think he could continue that into this one. And then you got Dorian Singer. Whenever you have a quarterback position problem, whenever you have a couple of different guys kind of flying in and out of that position, you need one guy. You need a guy where they can just say, I'm going to find number 3, I'm going to find his number, and I'm just going to throw that ball up, because he is a very talented player. He is, outside of probably Travis Hunter, he's probably the most talented wide receiver on the field on Saturday. So it's going to be really awesome to watch him go to battle with probably Travis Hunter on the defensive side, and we'll see what happens there. But I think when you have a quarterback problem, sometimes you just need that wide receiver to take over, and Dorian Singer would be that guy. And then you got Teo Johnson. That back end is going to deal with a lot this upcoming weekend, and he is the guy that just gets everyone in order, make sure everyone is in the right place, and that's going to be huge in this game where if you're in the wrong position, if you take the wrong angle, this team will be by you in a hurry, and you will be down by 14 points in a hurry. So he's going to be huge in this game, not just because he's got to make a couple of plays, but also just because he's huge for communication on that back end, and that's a huge part of the game whenever you play Colorado. Some keys to the game. Colorado's comfort is really just a key to the game the rest of the year for Colorado. They're going to have to find a way to just keep their cool, just keep their calm throughout this, because every single time they get closer and closer to the goal, they get closer and closer to the sun, the job gets harder. That's just the reality of every situation across college football. A lot of people are feeling that right now. Really, at every big school, every school that is in the hunt, they're feeling it right now. And especially with Colorado, you know that one loss could do you in this year. You're definitely a little bit on edge. So it's about going in with absolute comfort, a little bit of that swagger that you play with, and then just going to work the way you have pretty much all year. And then Utah's pass rush aggression is going to be huge in this game. You have Logan Fanna, you have Van Fillinger, you have a defensive coordinator in Morgan Scalley that is not scared to dial up some pressure. This Colorado offensive line has played a lot better of recent, but this is going to be a huge challenge for them. If they can get after Shadur Sanders, maybe some doubt creeps into the mind of Colorado pretty quickly. And then can Utah just limit explosives against this wide receiver group? It's been really, really hard to. Regardless of what defense they're playing, they are capable of making those big plays downfield. But the best way for Utah to get this one done, make this low scoring, make this a running game, make this a defensive affair, and then I think they have a real shot in this game. But can they do that? I'd be a little bit surprised. I'll be totally honest. I think this one gets a little bit ugly, and I think it's just the reality of Utah played a game last week that's just too much. It was so much energy, so much aggression, so much of their emotional and physical energy was put towards that game that I can't imagine that going on the road to a team that is so talented, so fast, that puts so much stress on your defense is going to be a winning formula. So I'm going to go with Colorado here. I'm going to go with them to win pretty comfortably here. I like Colorado, and I think they continue that march at least into next week when they play Kansas. That could be coming off another big win. That we'll get to that game here in a second. But moving forward, we got a huge game to talk about. Arizona State, Kansas State. It's an elimination game in the Big 12. As crazy as that sounds, Arizona State has found their way back into the Big 12 race. And let's break it down real quick because it's always crazy with all these tiebreakers. But they would be in the mix for the Big 12 title with a win. If Colorado were to lose one more and Kansas State were to beat Iowa State at the end of the year, that would be the team that would get into the Big 12 championship. So not all that far-fetched. Obviously, Kansas State would have to win on the road, which they haven't quite done very much all this year, and Colorado would have to lose one more, but it's not necessarily all out of the realm of possibility, especially in a conference like that. So Arizona State has fought their way back in, and now they got to go up against Kansas State, and it's going to be a heavyweight bout. These two teams are going to throw absolute haymakers, one way or the other. Kansas State top 20 in run defense and offense. Arizona State top 30 in both categories. It's going to be a slugfest, one way or the other. They're going to get after each other, and maybe it just comes down to who can make plays with his arm. Is it Avery Johnson? Is it Sam Leavitt? It might just be as simple as that. But the problem is for Arizona State, if they are going to get into a ground and pound type game, just whoever can run the ball more effectively, the status of Cam Scadaboo is a little bit up in the air. Now, it sounds like unless something changes, the way that Kenny Dillingham put it, he should be in this game and should be ready to roll. How close to 100% is he? Because he's going to get stuck a couple of times. Desmond Purnell is not shy about hitting you pretty aggressively. So that's the question here. Is he fully 100% if he gets hit on the shoulder in a weird way? If he goes down in a weird way? Does that create a little bit of confusion in that running back room? And then can Kansas State kind of pull away in this game just a little bit? And on the other side, just for fun, you have another top running back in the conference in DJ Giddens. You have Avery Johnson. You have Dylan Edwards. So it's going to be really, really fun to watch. And when it comes to run blocking, if you are an offensive line nerd, if you absolutely love offensive line play, go ahead and watch this game. They're going to be getting after each other, and there is going to be a couple of slabs. There's going to be a couple of pancakes, and it's going to be really, really fun to watch. No doubt about that. But the reality is, for Avery Johnson, he's had kind of an up and down year. He's been a little bit all over the place. He's had one game where he looks like a world beater. He looks like the guy that we expected to get this year with Will Howard moving on to Ohio State. Felt like he was really primed for a huge year. It's looked at like that at different moments this year. And then in other moments, it's looked downright terrible. It's looked a little bit all over the place. He's missed a lot of open receivers. He's thrown some picks, which it's not necessarily the strength of his game, the pass game. So it's something they're going to have to work around, no doubt about that. But the reality is, he's going to have to make some big-time plays in this game. Whether it's with his arm, well, it is going to have to be with his arm at some point, but with his legs, with his arm, he's going to have to, in some ways, take over this one. And the fun thing about this game is it is an elimination game one way or the other. If Colorado lost early in this game, it could just be an outright play-in game. Whoever wins this one, it could be that you're in a really, really good place, especially if Iowa State falls again to Cincinnati. Everything's on the table for this game, and it could just be an outright elimination game for the Big 12 championship, and we might know by going into it. It's going to be really, really fun to watch this one unfold, but we talked about the pass game. Jordan Tyson's really the only guy for Arizona State. He is such a physical, big-time receiver that when you look at this Arizona State roster, their second leading receiver is Cam Scadaboo. So they're going to have to get Jordan Tyson involved. They're going to have to get him involved pretty quickly and pretty consistently, and this Kansas State back end can be taken advantage of. They have a couple of good corners that can make some plays, but overall, they are a unit that can be taken advantage of, and Sam Leavitt is starting to play a little bit better football, throwing the ball downfield, so maybe this is a game where Jordan Tyson totally comes out of nowhere and takes over. And then you got Caleb McCullough, that linebacker for Arizona State. Whenever you play a team like Kansas State, it's all about just keeping your eyes on Avery Johnson. It's all about making sure that those guys' legs do not beat you. Everything else, you tip your cap, you move on to the next day. If you let Avery Johnson's legs beat you, you are doing the wrong thing if you're Arizona State. So Caleb McCullough, he's going to be chasing him around a whole lot on Saturday, and the reality is, if he can't get him on the ground, then Kansas State could pull away in this game and never look back. And then Keegan Johnson, the wide receiver on the other side, I think is going to be huge in this game. When you have a game like this that is really all ground and pound, really all aggression, and you do have Jace Brown also in this wide receiver group, sometimes it just comes down to that one third down conversion. Sometimes it just comes down to that one catch that you absolutely need, and number 10's really good at getting that catch. He's a very, very talented player and one of those guys that it seems like more and more Avery Johnson's kind of looking to him to kind of be the quote-unquote security blanket for this offense, and I think that big third down conversion could be where this game is won. And then you got Austin Moore, another linebacker on the other side, and it's for the same reason. You have an offense for Arizona State that is going to run the ball with Cam Scatterbu a lot. Sam Levitt's got some legs. He can make some plays on the outside if you let him, and it's going to be this guy's job to chase him down more times than not. So it's going to be awesome to watch this unfold, and I think when you look at this game, it's kind of just good on good. You're just going to have to figure out, who can execute at the higher level, and that's actually one of the keys to the game here. It is going to be a run game battle, one way or the other. That is the way this game is going to go down. Sometimes it will come down to who can make that one play through the air, so we'll see what happens there. But the reality is, it's going to be a rock fight for about 95% of this game. Who can execute better, who can play a little bit tougher, and who can stay upright in that fourth quarter and make sure that you're making the plays that you need to make. It's going to be really fun to watch. It might just be a war of attrition more than anything else. But then Kansas State's reset versus ASU staying hot. Kansas State's coming off a little bit of a bye after a really bad loss to Houston. If they win that game against Houston, they're in the driver's seat for the Big 12 going forward. They don't need help from Colorado going forward. So now you're in a bad spot, and now you have your back up against the wall, and you got to reset. You got to attack this one. And Arizona State on the other side, they've won 2 straight. They're absolutely rolling. They're a really good team right now, and Kenny Dillingham has done just a really incredible job there this season and really last season if you look back. But the reality is, it's going to be kind of a little bit of a battle. Can Kansas State get their wits about them, get back on track, or can Arizona State just keep rolling downhill and possibly to a crazy CFP berth? And then 50-50 plays. You have a game that is going to be run heavy. You have a game that's going to be slowed down, not a lot of possessions. Just going to be that one play, that one third down conversion, that one pick that gets away, that one fumble that bounces the wrong way and bounces into an Arizona State or Kansas State defender's hands. That's going to be the difference in this one. Whoever makes that one play down the stretch of this game is likely going to win it, and I'm going to bet on Kansas State to do it at home. I think it's going to be a little bit of a slugfest. I think Avery Johnson, he's going to make enough plays with his arm. Kansas State at home and away from home are 2 entirely different teams, but the at-home team is really, really good. So I'm going to lean towards Kansas State in this one, and I think they're going to be able to stay in the hunt, and maybe if Utah's able to pull off that upset, I don't expect them to, but if they are able to top Colorado earlier in the day, Kansas State could have just punched their ticket to the Big 12 championship. They would still have to handle business against Iowa State, of course, but they'd be right back in that driver's seat, and it just would be in their hands the rest of the way. So a huge game that one way or the other, one of those teams is eliminated, one is still very much alive in the Big 12, but that's going to be awesome to watch. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we're just going to go through the top 25 teams. We'll break down all of the big-time games from the top 25 this upcoming weekend, and there's a really, really good AAC game that it could just define who meets Army in that championship game right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some big time games in the Big 12. Definitely some ones that will just outright knock people out of the contention. One that could just put Colorado in a fantastic place to possibly make a run at a CFP, which would be just insane for so many different reasons. But let's jump into a couple of different games going on this upcoming weekend. And I think the biggest thing here I want to talk about is we'll get into a couple of games here throughout it that are going to be huge, but I wanted to talk about some of the top teams in the country, and we'll start with that number 2 team in the country, Ohio State, because they get a little bit of a tune-up. Let's be honest. They're playing Northwestern. They have a little bit of a tune-up as they get into that Indiana game next week, and this one has a little bit of a twist. It is going to be played at Wrigley Field, and if you've seen that field, it barely fits in there. It is going to be really interesting to see any of those toe-tap plays because there's not a lot of room to toe tap, but it's going to be fascinating to watch this game unfold, and I think for Ohio State, it's just about another clean performance. You saw it last week against Purdue. It's about taking care of the ball, running the football very efficiently, getting Will Howard a little bit more comfortable in this pass game, and then more than anything else, really, for the rest of the season for Ohio State, is that O-line. Just make sure that it builds cohesion a little bit more every single week. You're going to have a really tough test against that D-line of Indiana next week, and I think you're going to have to make sure that that O-line is fully ready to go, going downhill, and that run game has to get going as well. So I think they're going to be okay in this game no matter what, really, if I'm being totally honest, but they got some D-lines on the horizon that are going to be absolutely handfuls to deal with, so I think they win this game pretty comfortably, but it's going to be about how they play in it, not necessarily the final score at the end. And then we got this one. This is absolutely massive. Maybe one of the biggest games, maybe one of the most fun games of the weekend, so if you're not planning on watching this one, tune in because it's going to be awesome. But this is a huge game in the AAC, and it might just be the game that decides who faces off against Army at the end of the year in that championship game, because you won't be able to see Army Navy before that game happens. Tulane already has 2 losses on the season, would take their first conference loss here, and Navy would jump over them because of the tiebreaker. You'd be in a really good position if you're Navy to possibly play Army 2 games in a row. And then if you're Tulane, you'd be undefeated. Navy would have 2 losses. It would pretty much be you and Army. There would almost be no way that it would not be that. Now, craziness could happen, of course, but I would bet that if whoever wins this one, I would bet is playing Army at the end of the day in the American Championship and maybe playing for a spot in the CFP. But this game is going to be really, really fun. Both these teams are a little bit run-heavy offenses, but at the end of the day, Tulane has some dudes on the outside. They got Mario Williams, the old Oklahoma and USC receiver. They have I'm blanking on his name, and I very much apologize. Fleming, I cannot remember his first name, but very, very talented player nonetheless. A guy that can get downfield and make some big-time plays for them. They have Shaz Preston. They have a number of guys that are going to be a problem, but more than anyone, it's Mekhi Hughes. He's a remarkable running back for this team, and he is going to be a load for that Navy defense to handle. And then on the other side, you have Blake Horvath. You have Alec Tezka. You have Eli Heidenreich on that Navy offense, and they're a mean group as well. It's going to be a really fun game, kind of like that Arizona State-Kansas State game where they're going to run the ball. It's just about execution at the end of the day. I think Tulane is one of those teams that I think it's just going to be really tough for Navy to keep up offensively. Now, the Tulane defense can be had, so maybe this is just a shootout game where they go totally back and forth all day, but I'm going to give Tulane in this one. I have said it on here before. I think Tulane's the best team in the group of 5 right now, and I think they're going to prove it on Saturday. I think they will go to the American Championship and at least still have that shot at the CFP. Then you got Penn State-Purdue, another game where, let's be honest, it's about just kind of tightening the screws. It's about polishing a lot of different things, and I think the biggest thing here for Penn State is push the ball downfield. You played Washington last week, so you had to be a little bit more conservative. You got the quick touchdown, so no reason to really be aggressive in the pass game. Beat this team by 70 points. Be really aggressive pretty much all game. Let Drew Aller push the ball downfield. Let Drew Aller test out a couple of the things that one way or another, he's going to have to make those plays. One way or another, your wide receivers are going to have to make those plays because we just saw the rankings come out yesterday or 2 days ago. Ole Miss would be coming to your place. You're going to have to score points. You're going to have to hit a couple of those big-time plays. You're going to have to get behind the defense, and right now, it looks like something they just physically cannot do. Purdue would be the team that you could do it against. So test that. Push the ball downfield, be aggressive, open up that offense a little bit, and then maybe just give Katron Allen and Nick Singleton the day off in some ways. Just give them maybe 10 carries each and just let it be a little bit of an easy day for them. Push the ball downfield, be very aggressive in this game. Allow your offense to get a lot of momentum as you head into the back end of this schedule. I know it might be a little bit mean to Purdue. It's just something you got to do, because at some point you're going to have to make those plays through the air, and if you're not ready to make them, you're in a really bad spot. And honestly, more than anything else in this game, if there's any hesitation from Penn State, if there's any worry, if there's any missing, really, in this entire game, you got to be a little bit nervous. But give me Penn State, give them to me minus the points. It's going to be a really fun game, and I think Penn State gets fully back on track and hopefully keeps their CFP hopes alive. And then the game that we talked about on the upset alert meter a little bit earlier in the week, but this is going to be really interesting to watch this one unfold, and it's really just about Notre Dame handling the business they've been handling really since that loss to NIU. They've had a couple of little stumbles here and there, but the offense has really gotten going, and really more than anything, make this one boring if you're Notre Dame. Make sure that no one turns this one on, because this is one of those games that everyone's going to have kind of out of the corner of their eye, making sure they know the score. And if Virginia's, if it's a 7-point game going into the fourth quarter, you'll flip it on, you'll see what happens. Make sure that people never flip it on. That's the goal in this game for Notre Dame. Run the ball, be very aggressive on the ground, and then take your shots when you need them, because kind of like Penn State, you're going to need to make a couple of those plays in some big-time games, maybe probably even against Army next week. You're going to have to make a couple of those big-time plays through the air, so continue to build that confidence with Riley Leonard. But more than anything else, just Virginia is one of the worst teams in the country defending the pass, so you can be a little bit more aggressive. You can push the ball a little bit more. You can maybe be a little bit more risky than you would normally be, and especially against a team that is probably going to need about 2 or 3 turnovers to win this game. You can be a little bit more aggressive. You can be a little bit more out there, and I very much want them to be, because I think they're in a position where right now it's about making a statement. It's about style points in a way. You have an 11-1 Notre Dame with a loss to NIU. You have a 10-2 Tennessee with a loss to Georgia as their most recent one. I don't know. I'm not saying that Notre Dame wouldn't get in. I would expect them to get in. I'm just saying style points can't hurt them at this point. So get the win, push the ball downfield, be a little bit more aggressive, and make sure that no one's turning this one on a little bit later in this one. Then you got Boston College SMU. It's a very, very interesting game. Boston College coming off a huge win last week over Syracuse, where, man, did they run the ball. They were very aggressive on the ground and got 2 guys over 100 yards in that game. SMU coming off a bye and almost been gifted an ACC title berth on a silver platter. Now, they do need to win this game, but if they do, they punch their ticket to Charlotte in their very first year. They only have one more conference game coming up, and they're 1 game up on everyone. So they're in a position where they can lose 1 game and still be okay. They win this one, SMU will be going to Charlotte for the ACC championship. So it's going to be really interesting to watch. And SMU, since Kevin Jennings took over, has just been a different team. The only game that they scored under 30 was Duke, which they scored 28 points, and they gave away the ball 6 times. That is probably not going to happen in this game. It definitely didn't happen against Pitt, because they beat Pitt. Miami lost on the bye week, and now the world is theirs. Now they have all the opening in the world to possibly take this conference by storm and win it in its very first year and make some Clemson Florida State fans feel a little bit stupid for wanting to kick this team out. But the reality is, it's going to be really interesting to watch this one. The SMU run defense, one of the very best in the country. And Boston College, with all of the craziness going on around Thomas Castellanos, he has left the program. He is going to enter the portal after being benched last week. It is going to be Grayson James at quarterback. They're going to run the ball, and they're going to do it a whole lot. And if you have a top 10 run defense on the other side, I'm going to take SMU. I'm going to take SMU to win this one, punch their ticket to Charlotte, and really take a lot of people by surprise. Not so much myself, if you want to look back at my ACC predictions, but at the end of the day, a really, really talented team, and one where this could be a historic Saturday for SMU. And then you got Louisville-Stanford. This is a really interesting game, and Louisville kind of in the exact same position as South Carolina. They're looking for statement wins. They're looking for wins that really prove a lot to the committee, and also, just on top of that, they do need to make their way up in this conference. They probably do need to win this conference, let's just be totally honest, to make the CFP, but at the end of the day, if they win out, if Pitt were to beat Clemson this upcoming weekend, and Miami falls one more time, Louisville would have a spot in the ACC championship. So there's still some paths here for Louisville to get it done. Obviously, could come to an end this weekend if Clemson were to get the win. But at the end of the day, it's going to be really awesome to watch all of this unfold. And this is one that I think is going to be interesting to watch because Stanford hasn't necessarily been the greatest team in the world by any means. They've missed the mark a lot of different times. Ashton Daniels has been one of the more up and down quarterbacks in the entire country. Thing is, they were able to catch lightning in a bottle when they played Syracuse earlier in the year, and maybe they're able to do it here. That was a really potent passing attack from Syracuse at the time, and they were able to pretty much slow it down. Maybe they can do the same thing to Louisville and put them in a really bad spot. I do think Louisville will be able to win this game, but I think it could get a little bit ugly. I think Stanford has a little bit fight left in the tank, and I think Troy Taylor's going to have those boys ready to go. So I'm going to pick Louisville. Maybe I'll pick Stanford with the point. So I'll pick them to Louisville to win by less than 20 at the very least. And then Boise State, San Jose State. The Ashton Jeanty show goes on the road this week, and it is in prime time. It's right next to UGA, Tennessee, which absolutely stinks. But at the end of the day, he does get a little bit of a marquee spot to show his skills. And frankly, with a lot of guys, with Dylan Gabriel off this week, with Cam Ward off this week, you have an ability to jump back up really to the top of this conversation this week if you can really put on an absolute show. Now, the San Jose State defense is a solid run defense, kind of middle of the road in the country, but doesn't tend to matter. If we're being totally honest, when you play Ashton Jeanty, how good your run defense is or not, it's just, can you get this guy on the ground? Most people just can't. So I'm going to go with Boise State to win this game. I think San Jose State could make this one just a little bit interesting, but I'll pick Boise State to win, and I think Ashton Jeanty puts on a pretty good show for us all. And then BYU is going to play another night game. They're going to keep us up to 2 a.m. once again, but it is going to be Kansas-BYU, a huge game, and right now Kansas is the lead killers, the world killers, I suppose, in the Big 12 right now. They're doing a really, really good job towards the end of the season of getting everything back on track. They just went on the road to Iowa State and claimed another victim. They're looking to get one here. It would be absolutely incredible to watch this unfold, and it would keep them in bowl contention and create a ton of pressure around BYU, because BYU can lose this game and still be in the Big 12 championship. They would be more than fine if they were to fall here. They would still be number one in the conference. They go on the road to Arizona State next week, and if Arizona State were to win this week against Kansas State, that becomes a huge game. That becomes a game that could just decide who goes between BYU and Arizona State to the championship at the end of the day. So this is a huge game for BYU one way or the other. If they win this one, I feel very good about them getting to Arlington. If they lose, then I feel much, much worse about them possibly making that trip to Arlington. And even though they are undefeated right now, we've seen those seasons fall apart in about 8 days. Could happen to BYU here if they're not careful. But for BYU, if they win this game, they're in a really, really good position going forward. For Kansas, it's just about keeping this fan base fully engaged going into 2025. It's just about putting on a crazy performance toward the end of the season, making everyone notice you, and really just getting a little bit of momentum going into that 2025 season. And I think they're going to get it done. I think the magic for BYU comes a little bit to an end this upcoming weekend. They're still alive in the Big 12 race, but I think Kansas gets the one done. I think Jalen Daniels puts on another show, and they get to 4-6 with Colorado next week. So a lot of things can happen for the Kansas Jayhawks over the next little bit, and I think they're going to get a win this weekend. I think they're going to put BYU in a little bit of dire straits, and that Big 12 is going to get yet another twist and turn to it. So it's going to be an awesome week. Cannot wait to break it down and tie up all the loose ends tomorrow, but that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people doing great work across every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I'll be back tomorrow to tie some loose ends for this big Week 12.